Hey, romance fans, you're watching Romance Rewind, a talk show that chats with romance authors about the romance movies from the 80s, 90s, and aughts that inspired their careers and novels. I am Liz Donatelli, and my co-host is Tiffany Curran. Our guest is LYNN Painter, rom-com author of Mr. Wrong Number. We will discuss LYNN's movie inspiration, the classic 1998 romantic comedy,
You've Got Mail.
Hi, LYNN.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, Lynn.
We've been super excited to launch the show, particularly with you, LYNN. I am a fan of Mr. Wrong Number.
Yes,
And
ditto.
apparently now I'm a fan of You've Got Mail. So we'll get into that. A text sent to a wrong number develops into an anonymous romance between accident-prone Olivia and her brother's best friend and her longtime antagonist, Colin. A title borrowed from the old school AOL dial-up internet
You've
service.
Got Mail.
Two rival bookstore owners, played by Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks, unwittingly engage in an email romance after meeting in an online chat room.
You know what's funny? When you just described You've Got Mail, hearing the description for the first time made me nervous and uncomfortable. I'm like, oh no, they met in a chat room? Because like back in the day, it wasn't a big deal. But now I hear it. I was like, oh my God, it's like a horror movie. Now when you hear the tagline, this is the start of a horror movie. That's actually what You've Got Mail.
You've got mail. You've got mail. You've got mail.
Yes.
That's what it is.
So, being you mentioned the chat room, and I knew you were going to comment on the chat room. The chat room is just mentioned in passing, where I think Meg Ryan is telling her coworkers, "Oh, we met in a chat room for such and such, like a community business chat room or something like that." So,
it wasn't a business chat room, but that's fine.
oh, what kind of chat room was it?
This was it was a meetup. It was
Yeah, I think it was like
said
singles over a certain age or something.
Singles over
you're
30.
right. It was singles
I don't know
over
if it was
30.
singles. I hope not, because she's in a relationship. But it was some sort of like room for people over 30. Yeah.
Okay, a room for people over. That's okay. So it was kind of like almost like a throwaway line type of thing. Yeah. But you're right. Now, LYNN, I don't know where you fall in as far as generations. I'm Gen X. Tiffany, you're not quite.
Don't
Gen
age me. Don't age.
I don't think she's Gen X. But anyway, I remember when chat rooms came into existence, and it was all we did in college was like cut class to go on these chat rooms, and they were kind of seedy. They were seedy.
They were seedy. LYNN, what about you? Did you ever do a chat room back in the day?
You know what's weird is I never did. They were all the rage, and I don't know why I steered clear of the chat rooms. I think I must have just been oblivious. I was doing something stupid instead, because it seems like something I would have enjoyed.
It sounds like you were out living life, and Liz and I were inside in front of a computer pretending like we knew the person we were talking to. But I also remember doing it. I don't think I was in college, but I remember doing it as well, and just being like, oh, I'm meeting a boy. I don't even know him. Until when I was watching this, I specifically remember, because as a kid, it was so exciting, my parents catching me. And then them giving me a talking to, like, you don't know who that is. And I was like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? And now as an adult looking back, I'm like, they were protecting me because you don't know who it is.
Now we know.
Now we know. Yeah. But I used to love that. Yeah. It was just super exciting. Whenever I heard that, and we'll get there, the start of the dial-up, sound, I was like, oh, that brings me back to when I was a kid. Yes. And it also made me feel really old, because that was like ages ago. And like kids today will be like, dial-up. It's dial-up.
Yes, I know. And there's a line later on that Tom Hanks says that "You've Got Mail" are the most powerful words. And I'm like, back in the day, like, yeah, anything with AOL was powerful. But like when they say "You've Got Mail," you're like, oh,
Right. Like, what is it?
I know. Who wrote me? It could be anything.
It could be that creepy guy I met in the
chat room.
There was so much promise.
Yes.
So much promise.
Yes, so much promise. And that's actually a good lead into my first question for LYNN is, what part of that anonymous pen pal trope that we see in You've Got Mail did you find so appealing that you had to write that into the story for Mr. Wrong Number?
Okay, what I love about that is, and I feel like a lot of us, when you talk to somebody, like even your friends, when you're texting them, I feel like sometimes you're able to be more yourself, your funnier self, the person you are underneath it all, when you're just typing or texting. And I feel like it's so interesting how many times, like even whether it be at work or something, and you're sending an email and you start going back and forth with, Jan and billing at the company you're doing business with, but you guys are like, haha, and you're saying something. And it just seems like you cut through all of the awkward social things and you can go straight to just like, dude, your mom's wedding dress, you can just go straight to a smart ass comment. And
you can use emojis. You can use emojis too to express your feelings.
Exactly. And so I feel like it's fun. Like in You've Got Mail, I love the fact that this person who is your favorite person online that you don't know, and the person in real life that you hate, I just love the juxtaposition that that's the same freaking person,
I remember like when I was reading your book, I thought it must have been tough because nowadays it's really tough for things to be anonymous because you can easily figure out who people are. Even like, and most of the time in social media, you can figure out who the person is, so on and so forth. So what I liked about this is here's a way, much like back in the day, where you could somehow get introduced to somebody anonymously and have no idea who they are and just say whatever you want. So I really like that aspect of, because in today's world, that's almost impossible.
Have you ever engaged in a text romance, like an anonymous text romance, Tiffany? Why do I feel like you might have?
No, yes and no. I will say that I've never, like the premise of your book, I've never received an anonymous, like you up text from somebody from people I've known. Yes. But not like an anonymous text, but there have been back in the day. It sounds very shady. Like Craigslist anonymous groups type situation where I've, met people anonymously, but that's probably to the extent of it. What about you, Liz? Put me on the spot with my dirty past.
Not text, but do you know, I used to sit there and think when I was single, of course.
Yesterday.
I would think to myself, wouldn't it be fun if someone just some hot guy randomly texted me and I was able to impress him with my wit and humor?
Oh, that's true.
Because that's another thing is I feel like it levels the playing field, any type of anonymous communication. Like, it's where people of all shapes, sizes, colors, looks, fashion, can, just get to the heart of things. But actually, my husband and I met through email, through work, and we had an email relationship first, and then it went to phone. Yeah. And we went through work, and I was like, here's my big moment, right? Like now I can, wow this person with my humor. And we emailed back and forth, and then we went to phone, and then from there we met each other. So
so it actually happened to you.
It works.
It does.
I can't remember the exact time that I saw it, but I do remember really wanting to watch it because it's Tom Hanks, and I love ever since Big, I love Tom Hanks. And it was the whole Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan situation, and they'd been in Joe versus the Volcano, which I loved, and Sleepless in Seattle. And so when I knew this was coming out, I was excited about it because of the coupling and also because of I could relate to the whole AOL, getting the mail situation. Mail. I remember really looking forward to the movie and then and just enjoying it because like everything about the film was very light and it was romantic, and I was really into that as a kid. What about you two?
What's funny is I don't remember at all the first time I saw it, but for me, it's been such a rewatch. Like my daughter, her and I used to watch it together, my oldest daughter. And it's like every year in the fall, we have to rewatch it. And it's like, as soon as the leaves start to change, you're like, oh yeah, we have to watch You've Got Mail. So now it's kind of almost become a part of us and our life. Like in the fall, that sounds way too cheesy, but I just mean, it's been rewatched so many times that it would be impossible for me to even remember what it used to be like before I knew it so intimately.
As a yearly fall watch, I think that's a great choice. Even Christmas, because they do go into Christmas at some point.
Yeah,
So I
they
feel
do.
like you could watch it anywhere from September through, December.
That's true.
So,
It gets happy in the
Yeah.
spring. You could watch it all year round.
yeah. The first time I watched this movie was Friday, May 20th, 2022.
Are you making a joke?
Seriously? You didn't watch it till Friday?
You've never seen this movie before?
Okay, listen, I have seen scenes in flipping the
Liz.
channels, but I've never watched the whole movie. So
That's
this movie came
hilarious.
out in
So
December
funny.
This came out in December 1998. I was a senior in college and I would go to the movies with my friends, but rom-coms or anything romantic really wasn't on our radar. Like that wasn't
Wow.
something. So I just wasn't interested in seeing it. To be
That's so
honest, I
deep.
thought this movie came out in the 80s. And when I saw it came out in 98, I was like, really? Like,
You're
why
like,
did
what was
go see
what
it?
was I
Yeah.
doing? That's fascinating. It starts with like, the dial-up sound, and I was like, and that's when I was like, oh, I remember that. This is good music to me. It cuts to like Meg Ryan in her pajamas, and she's waiting until Greg Kinnear leaves before she like runs in front of the computer, and then Tom Hanks does the exact same thing. Like they're
Yeah.
waiting to talk to that person. And I was watching it, and I remember thinking as a kid how cute. I'm like, oh, they're waiting to talk to the person they met in the chat room. But as an adult,
Yeah.
I was like, this is an emotional affair.
Right.
Yes.
Before, as a kid, I was like, so cute, very romantic. But now I'm like, yeah, they're kind of cheating.
Yeah.
I thought about that too. And I'm glad, Lynn, that
Funny.
you omitted any type of possibility of us saying, hey, they were both they were having affairs. Like
That wasn't a question I had. Yeah.
Yes, you
She
removed
admitted it.
that from the equation. Did you have a question about that, Tiffany?
Well, I wanted to know, is that why you removed it? Because it was, in fact, an emotional affair. You made them both single. She just was, just got out of a relationship. I have no idea where Colin was in his singlehood. But neither one were connected. So was that like a conscious choice so that it's like a cleaner start to the relationship?
It was. And Mr. Wrong Number was kind of super loosely, like it wasn't something where I was like, oh, I want to rewrite You've Got Mail. It was more like I really liked the theme of it with the anonymous texting. So my goal wasn't necessarily to have it follow super closely, but I'm just one of those people where I don't think I could ever write something and root for the two main characters knowing that they were hurting somebody else like on purpose.
Yeah.
Nora Ephron does her thing so well that you totally like miss, even as an adult, if you aren't really giving it a lot of thought,
Yeah.
you don't really think about it. And then all of a sudden you're like, and they do a great job of making the relationship so distant,
Innocent,
like Greg
yeah.
Kinnear and Meg Ryan's relationship. And then, why can't I
Parker
think of her name?
Posey.
Parker
Yes,
Posey.
Parker
Posey.
Posey. She's so amazing in this.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
her and Tom Hanks' relationship, they each have their own issues where you don't feel like the one who's getting emotionally cheated on is going to be that bummed out about the situation. So they kind of soften it.
That's true. That's true. I will say the one thing I found of note, like after you kind of meet them, you see them each kind of like walking down New York City in the fall. And to me, this brought back memories to watching it when I was a kid. Because they had like the Cranberries music that started. I don't remember that song.
Yes.
And it just brought back memories. Because I remember after watching this movie the very first time, I went out and bought the CD. That's how old it was. It was a CD. I went and I got the CD because I'm like, this soundtrack is amazing. The Cranberries.
It was a nice blast from the past with some of the songs. And then some of the songs I questioned why they were in scenes. And that I'm saving for the end because I've got some big things to talk about about the ending. But I like that you mentioned about the atmosphere of New York. So New York is a setting and it's also a character.
Yes.
Manhattan, New York City has always been romanticized. Now, Mr. Wrong Number is set in Omaha, which gave me pause. I was like, Omaha? Like, I was like, oh yeah, I guess people live in Omaha. Like, it's not something I often think of that city. But you do a really good job, Lynn, of bringing in, the essence of the city. And you mentioned restaurants. I actually looked them up and they do exist, some of these restaurants. So,
cool.
I did look them up because I was like, I wonder. And, you mentioned a little bit of the lifestyle. What was it about setting Omaha? Because you live in Omaha, correct?
Yes.
So what was it about Omaha that you felt would make a good setting for the book? Because you could have easily just, made it New York City or some other supposedly very romantic city. So, I mean, I was wondering, like, what to you said is romantic about Omaha that you're like, yeah, I'm going to set this in Omaha?
Okay, my answer is going to be super boring because it's not really romantic. It's honestly, I just thought like there's certain stories where you feel like they need to be set in a big city for whatever reason. In this story, two anonymous people, brothers, best friends, sort of a thing, I didn't feel like the setting was necessarily another character, like in You've Got Mail. And so I was like, why not set it in Omaha? Writing what you know. But then it was funny afterwards because I've got a bunch of like writer friends I've met who live all over. And it made me laugh afterwards because I'm like, oh, I might have made a mistake because I assume that everybody knows that Omaha's not Manhattan, but it's a city. We have a downtown and there's a nightlife and all this. And then one of my friends in Canada is like, is Nebraska really a place? And then another friend of mine who lives in upstate New York, she's like, seriously, you're just down there in like Kansas, Oklahoma. It's all like the same thing, right? And I'm like, oh no, I hope I don't pull people out of it. They're like, I don't want to read about this non-existent place.
I will say, I think for a while when I was reading it, I just kind of like, just skimmed over Omaha because I'm like, for the longest time, I thought it was LA because she kept looking out into the city because it had this great skyline. I was like, oh, she's in downtown LA. That's where the loft is, right? Yeah. And then later on, somebody said Omaha, and I was like, Omaha? Like, what are they talking about? And I went back and I was like, oh, this takes place in Omaha. So I was at least halfway through the book before I realized like this takes place in Omaha.
You're like, why?
But
it wasn't why. I just thought it was LA from all the like things they were doing. It felt very LA to me.
It changed my view of Omaha because I'm like, it seems to be like it's a real city. It's a bustling city. It seems like there's great food. There's great like scenery vistas because they're looking out the window. So to me, I was like, oh, this is kind of like a cozy urban vibe that I thought was really conducive to a romance. So I was like, oh, I kind of want to read more romances set in Omaha. Banter is of note because although yours is way sexier, Lynn. So I really enjoyed. So we have the banter between Kathleen Kelly, aka Meg Ryan, as Shop Girl, Joe Fox, aka Tom Hanks, NY152.
Yeah.
And then we have Mr. Wrong Number and Miss Style in, Mr. Wrong Number. And what makes both of them so special is the banter and the back and forth and that intimacy that you're creating between the characters. So as far as the craft of banter, is that something that just comes naturally to you, Lynn? Is it something that you've studied by watching perhaps movies like You've Got Mail or taking classes? I don't know if they have banter 101 in romance writing, like, because it was so tight. It was so back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it's like, oh, like, I just want to keep reading. And then it gets sexy. You got some sexy stuff.
There's a lot of sex in there. I appreciated that as a reader.
Yeah.
I haven't taken any classes on banter writing. But I think some of it has seeped in because I grew up watching like When Harry Met Sally. I mean, there's not better banter than that back and forth. I just think it's something that it's always been my favorite thing, like in movies and books, just the stupid things they say, the quick back and forth of the silly things. That's usually my favorite. And I would just write books that was just constant banter if I could, like plot, whatever. That's kind of hard. But if I could just write two characters texting back and forth, I would do that all day. That's my favorite.
And I would read that. I would read that all day, every day from you, Lynn.
At one point, Tom Hanks goes to like Starbucks and he says like, and I really appreciated it. It's just Nora Ephron writing. He's like, the whole point of Starbucks is that there's people who don't know what they want. So they can feel like they have a sense of self making an order because you have to be like tall, short, frappuccino.
Right.
I don't know. I really liked like that kind of like little banter that they had in the movie as well. It was cute.
Yeah. Were you shocked that Starbucks was around in 1998?
I was. Yes.
Yeah,
I was super amazed.
Right? I was like, wait, really? Starbucks has been around that long?
It's been around forever. Yeah.
And even back then, people were making jokes about it.
They were making jokes about it because they know how silly it was. And we still drink it.
Yeah. I don't go into Starbucks I don't drink coffee, but if I go in for like anything other than coffee, like tea, and I'll tell them straight up, I don't come here often, so I don't know what size. So whatever size is like regular, a regular like this, whatever that is. I don't know.
You're like,
And
I
they
want that
they
one.
hate me. They hate
I need
me.
a translator.
Eventually, Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks, I can't remember the real characters, they meet at the bookstore, a meet cute, where he knows who she is because he's taking over her store eventually in the future, but she doesn't know who he is. But they kind of still have like a little romantic moment because for me, this is Meg Ryan kind of like at her peak cuteness factor.
Yes.
During that time period. And like I think she was talking about twirling. And he was just like really into her. When the characters meet, you can automatically tell, oh, they're going to get together. The same thing like in your book, like even though they kind of, hated each other, you could tell from the banter that Colin and Olivia were eventually going to, in your case, get it on, I guess. But it was,
and I agree about Meg Ryan. I've seen Meg Ryan in a number of films.
Yes.
And I have to say that she was the most delightful in You've Got Mail.
Yeah, she was delightful.
Yeah, she was really delightful. She wasn't annoying. She let's face it, sometimes like in Kate and Leopold, she's very annoying.
Yes. In
other movies, Meg Ryan's character is a little different, but this one, it was like consistently just a sweet, likable person. So when her store was eventually, shut down, then we felt really bad for her. But what I liked about this, eventually in the movie, Fox Books opens up and then we see people coming in and like sitting down at the coffee shop and pulling out their book bag and their stuff. And when I was watching this scene, when we see the Fox bookstore, pretty much like a Barnes and Noble, or back in the day when they used to have Borders open up, I was reminded of real books, like a big bookstores. You could just go sit and drink coffee and just stay there for hours. And I really missed them.
I always thought that was really something cool that they did with the movie, where he's the big bad Fox Books. Yeah. But then when they show her going into the store, they actually show that she recognizes that this is a place for book lovers. It's not my lens that I saw it through, but this is a place for book lovers. So I thought that was really sweet the way they did that.
It is, because today I feel like that's always been kind of a divisive issue over the years, is indie bookstore or big box, stores. Like when I go into Barnes and Noble, I feel kind of guilty because I'm like, I feel like but unfortunately the indie bookstores in and around Columbus, Ohio do not carry extensive romance novels, right? Yeah. So I picked up, Mr. Wrong Number at Barnes and Noble, and they have a huge romance section. Yeah. I'm like, well, of course I'm going to come back. But you feel like over the years, there's a certain shame, I think, attached to, you're not buying indie. There's so much of that divisiveness. So I thought that was such a great scene that they included her walking in. She's like, wow, this is pretty awesome. That these books, so many books are available, and for people who maybe can't afford full price, they can get it. It's like more accessible to all. So I thought it was interesting that was an issue then, and it's an issue now.
It still exists.
Yeah, but seeing how Meg Ryan's character handled that, I was like, it was a really beautiful scene, actually.
Yeah.
And it was actually a love scene. It was like her with the love
with books.
Books. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. Speaking of indie bookstores, Tom Hanks mentions to Meg Ryan, he goes, oh yeah, that your bookstore earns like $350,000 a year in annual sales. Like, does that track?
I have no
idea. I don't know. That was a pretty specific number. I was like, Nora Ephraim must have been doing some research.
Right? Like 350,000 back then. Now would be much more.
That's actually a lot of money for New York.
That doesn't sound right. It was a children's bookshop, so it was only children's books, right? So I don't know.
But remember when he went into the bookstore, he bought a book. I think like his total cost came to like $75. He's like, $75 for a children's book?
He's like, that's why it's so expensive. And the other guy is like, no, that's why it's worth so much.
That's why it's worth so much.
Right. Yeah.
And he kind of rolled his eyes. But eventually at some point they go to a party, and that's when Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan realizes who Tom Hanks is. He's Joe Fox and she's pissed off. And that's when the whole enemies to lovers trope kind of begins.
Yep.
And I wanted to know, is that your favorite trope to write? Kind of the enemies to lovers, Lynn, or?
I can never decide. I can't pick a trope. I think it is my favorite, but only when it's not. For me, writing, not reading, but writing, it's probably my favorite, but they can't really be true enemies. I think it would be really hard to write a book where you absolutely hate each other. Mine are more like annoyances to lovers sort of book, where they really don't like each other, but it's not set in stone.
Yeah.
But I just finished writing Olivia's brother's book. And that's more of a
Oh,
friends to lovers book. And that was
interesting.
super fun because they were like, but they're both dating on online apps. And so they have a bet who's going to find true love first. So they're like constantly bantering about dates they go on. And I was
That's
like,
cute.
oh my gosh, friends to lovers is pretty fun to write too. So I don't know. I think I'm fickle in whatever I'm working on. I'm like, this is my favorite thing in the world.
Right. In
Yeah.
reference to that scene that you're speaking of, Tiffany, there is apparently it's a popular line.
Okay, yeah.
And I posed this
I know what it's
question.
going to be.
I posed this question to
Me
both of
too.
you. Is caviar a garnish?
I knew you were going to ask for the garnish because I remember that in that scene, she's upset that he's Joe Fox and he's like filling his plate with stuff and he takes some caviar that's around. I don't even know what it's around, but he starts taking it. She's like, what are you doing? That's a garnish.
Yeah.
And he just takes all the caviar.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was rude what he was doing, but I think he
It
was
was
allowed
funny.
to take that. You're allowed to eat the caviar around. What was it around?
Not
It
the
looked like
whole
a
garnish,
hummus
though.
thing. Looked like hummus, and then there was just caviar.
It was a
around.
garnish. You should take some, but not the whole thing is the point. It was a garnish. It
Yeah,
was a
I
garnish.
mean, technically you could take any garnish, but
Hey.
most people do not,
They
right?
don't.
That's right. But she was so appalled. I'm like, it's not like he licked his finger and put it in. I mean, let him eat it. He's got crackers. Let him take it.
And that's the start of, I love their, they've got
Yeah.
their texting banter where it's
Yeah.
less flirty and more like sweet. But I love in that scene when they start their back and forth like hate banter,
Yeah.
because I think it's brilliant when then at the end of that scene when he says to Patricia, like, hey, have you tried the caviar garnish? And it's so great. I love it.
I like that.
yeah.
And I'll say from there, like I think the kind of the hate continued because we kind of kept
Yeah.
seeing them like run into each other through the city, but pretending not to see each other. And then eventually they're at a grocery store and Meg Ryan sees him and she tries to avoid him. So she gets into the wrong line and it's like the cash line, but she doesn't have cash. And what I loved about this,
yeah.
because when I was younger, this wasn't the case, but as an adult, the cashier, I don't know if you guys remember this, the cashier is Callie from Grey's Anatomy.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yes.
that's Callie. Tom Hanks came over and he was charming he kind of charmed the cashier in order to get her to let Meg Ryan use her credit card.
Yeah.
And that reminded me, I think in your book as well, something happens where generally speaking, Colin is always very sweet and nice. I think at one point, Olivia's friend comes over, they're drinking wine, and then Colin is just being very nice and friendly.
Yeah,
And she's like, he doesn't do that with me. So it's just kind of interesting in your book of how he's showing charming to others, but not necessarily to her. Was that a conscious choice?
I don't think it was a conscious choice. I think it's always fun to do that in enemies to lovers where, you're starting to see somebody maybe in a little bit of a different light. And then all of a sudden you're like, this is the person who just, fill in the blank of this awful thing they did to you an hour ago. And then he's being super sweet. And your friend is like, I think he's great. Like you think he's a jerk and you're like,
Yeah.
he is a jerk,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I always think that's kind of fun to mess with.
I love that. And that's a great scene. And you know what, to me, why I really especially like that scene is that at that point, I think she had revealed to him about how she gets tongue-tied. So, and
Yes,
she had
that's
gotten
true.
tongue-tied in that moment. So I feel like that was him remembering she gets tongue-tied. I'm going to help her out, but not make it seem like she can't help herself, but kind of just do my sweet talking and try to
Very sweet
assist in the
talking thing.
situation.
And I think at some point we see Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan talking online, and she mentioned she has a store. I don't know if she said she has a store yet, but he says
Eventually.
I'm in trouble. Can you help? And he's like, go to the mattresses.
I didn't know the
She
reference.
kept saying that men use this line from Godfather, apparently, go to the mattresses. I've never heard anybody say that in real life. Never heard anybody say go to the mattresses.
I haven't either.
Not that line, but you know what? As she does say, what is it with men in The Godfather? That I have noticed. Like
Yes.
my husband's a huge, Godfather fan and can, throw out the movie quotes.
Means to it's a mafia. You go to the war. Yeah, there's a mafia battle between two rival families.
And eventually, I think in real life, in the movie, they meet for the first time. They decide to meet, and Meg Ryan is waiting there with, I think it's with her Pride and Prejudice book, and then Tom Hanks shows up with Dave Chappelle. Looking back, I'm like, it's Dave Chappelle.
I had
in this
no idea
movie.
he was in this.
You're like, what is Dave Chappelle doing in this Nora Ephron movie?
Let me tell you, Dave Chappelle looked great.
Yeah.
He looked great.
He looked great. That man ages very, very well.
Well, that was like 20 years ago. So of course he looked great.
No. I'm saying, oh, well, yeah, I guess I didn't say that right. I mean, he looked great then, but he doesn't look so much older now than
That's
he
true.
looked almost like
He aged very well.
very well. He was fantastic. The two of them had a good
Yes.
rapport.
Yes, totally.
Tom Hanks and Dave Chappelle. Why didn't they do more movies together?
I don't know. They did. They should have had like a buddy cop movie or
Yes.
something. But you know that
Buddy
that-
cop.
They had like they had a good rapport. But I think Chappelle was the first one. He's like, you know, I think, and I always remember this line because it's very Chappelle-ish. He looks in because Tom Hanks is like, "What does she look like?" And Chappelle's like, "I think she has the same coloring
Yes.
as Kathleen Kelly." And I was like, "That's such a Chappelle line." Ignore Efron and read that. That was a Chappelle line. It was so cute. I was like, coloring.
That's a fantastic scene. And I have something to add about that scene. Okay?
Yes.
So there's this very iconic speech that he delivers. But what I want to know is, why are mailboxes considered the ultimate eyesore? Because this is what Tom Hanks says. Okay. He says to Dave Chappelle, "This woman," referring to Kathleen, Meg Ryan, "is the most adorable creature I've ever been in contact with. And if she turns out even to be as good looking as a mailbox, I'd be crazy not to turn my life upside down and marry her." Beautiful sentiment, but a mailbox? Like, why a mailbox? Like, why was that the ugliest, most unattractive thing that you could think of? You're like, even if she looks like a mailbox, like, I thought that kind of ruined it for me. It took me out. I was like, what's up with the mailbox?
You're like a
Liz,
mailbox.
I've seen it 100 times and I never realized he said mailbox.
He says
I
mailbox.
was
Lynn.
swept away into his
Yeah.
excitement. I never even realized that. That's hilarious.
And I was too, because I was like, wow, this is a really heartfelt, very original, the way he's, phrase, the way he's delivering it. And he says, I'd be crazy not to turn my life upside down. And I just stuck on the mailbox.
I don't even remember the mailbox line either. I just remember it being a sweet moment. I feel like
now I've ruined it for both of you.
Yeah, you did in your book, and I don't think this is a reveal. At some point, Colin figures out that it's Olivia who he's been texting, and he doesn't handle it the same way. He doesn't treat her, at least in that moment, meanly, I guess you could say. Instead, he's just more shocked and surprised, and he starts to kind of rethink things. I guess, what made you decide to kind of stray there from the actual movie there?
I think my goal was, I really loved in You've Got Mail that he ghosted her after he figures out who it is, that he just disappears. I mean, I don't love that because that would be such a bummer, but I feel like plot wise that's, I don't know. I really loved that. So I wanted him to have that decision. Like, what do I do now? Guess I'm going to just have to stop texting her. But I couldn't make him mean either. I wanted it more to be, he was sad, like almost felt a little empty, like he was losing this, anonymous person that had become something to him. So I wanted him to be a little frustrated, like he's a little frustrated, but not mean, and a little sad. But then when she keeps texting, he finds that he can't just completely ghost her because he can't.
I'm not going to spoil, but I really like how Colin ghosts Olivia, but doesn't really ghost her. So I thought that was a really fun twist on ghosting.
It was a fun twist. But so in You Got Mail, though, I think Meg Ryan is upset with herself for because eventually she kind of goes off on Tom Hanks and says something really mean to him, which he deserved, mind you.
Mm-hmm.
But then she goes home and she still writes to this guy behind the screen, even though he stood her up. And she said, like, "Where were you? I wish you were there. I said these terrible things." And she said the line something like, all these nothings that we've been writing about mean so much more than so many somethings. And I thought, that's sweet.
Yes.
That's one of my favorite quotes in the movie.
It's a fantastic quote. It's an absolutely fantastic
sweet
quote. I see why the movie is very quotable.
Now that you've seen it for the first time.
Now that I've seen it for the first time. Okay, you're kind of leading up to the scene that I wanted to discuss. The sexiest moment of the film is the scene
There's
where
a sexy moment. Okay.
Yes. Well, yes. And you have to really look at it with fresh eyes, like I did. Yeah. She's in bed sick. And he, brings her flowers and he tucks her into bed, and she still is resisting him because he's still the big bad guy who's trying to, who just put her out of business. And she is about to say something really mean to him, and he covers her mouth to stop her. And at first I was like, "Ooh, don't do that." Like, I wouldn't want someone putting their hands on, like, shut up, you know. But he's doing it because he knows from their communications how much she kicks herself when she says things she'll regret. So he even says, like, "I'm going to stop you before you say something that you're going to regret for years to come." And so he stops her and she kind of quiets. And then as he moves his hand off of her mouth, it's like he kind of caresses her lip.
I don't remember that.
Really?
I have to
Yes,
go
look at it again.
that.
He kind of like, he looked at it.
I think
and he
you were
just,
hoping that's what was
No,
happening.
he
You're like, oh, this
caressed
is
her-
about to be a sex scene.
No, he caressed her lip.
He's
and
got a
sex
cold.
scene.
What's he doing?
Yeah. He's
Well, I didn't
He's
think of that.
wiping
And
the
she-
drool off.
And she
that
looks
face.
at him with like new eyes, like, "Oh my God, like I see him as, you know, a different person. Like he's a kind guy and he just sexually touched my lips." I don't know. To me, I thought it was a really sexy turning point in the relationship.
That's fascinating. When I was younger, I was like, oh, this is so sweet. He just shows up at her house. He was a stalker, guys. He like tracks her down unannounced, shows up at her house. I don't know how he got her address, right?
It's true. She
Walks
doesn't let
in.
him in.
She doesn't let him in. She says, no, I don't want you to come up. Somebody else opens the door. He walks in.
Yes, he did.
Saying in
He
real
pushed his
life,
way in.
I was like, he was a stalker.
Okay, well, here's the thing. I tried to piece this together, how he even knew. So I gathered from their conversation prior to his leading her to bed to tuck her in, she mentioned, "Oh, how is George?" which is Steve Zahn's character.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, yeah, you know, nobody in his department can even work in the children's section unless they have a degree." So I think George was hired by Fox Bookstore.
He was.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
He was.
Oh, okay. So that wasn't a
So that's
surprise.
how he knew the address, though. That's good.
Yeah,
That
that's
gets
probably how
full-
he knew the
full
address.
circle.
But yeah, he was
But then
totally
I
there.
think that's how he knew, A, she's sick, what's her address? But still, George just gave up her address, which in today's
Super
day
weird.
and age, you know,
Come
can
on,
be dicey.
George.
I
but-
would be texting him like, I'm not giving you any more information in my life. You're just
Yeah.
handing this out to strangers where I live.
So that's how he
He's
found her.
Louise.
Yeah. So I mean, was it stalkerish? I mean, some
Yeah, it's
people would
still a
say he was
stalker.
persistent. You could say he's persistent.
It's only persistent
Tom
because
Hanks
it's
is
a romance movie. It's only persistent because it's a romance movie. If this was a Lifetime movie, we'd be like, he was a stalker.
Okay, so
They
you
would go to the
wouldn't be-
police.
You wouldn't be touched if you were sick and some guy you kind of know showed up with flowers and "I heard you were sick. Let me tuck you into bed." That would creep you out?
It always depends on how you feel about that person.
Yeah.
If you slightly like them, it's romantic. If you don't like them, it's like, this is, you know, an abuse of privacy. It really depends on your feelings about that person.
That's
It can
true,
go either
though.
way, right? It's true. It's a romance movie or it's a horror movie. You have
Okay,
to,
yeah.
it's a fine line.
So I say it's sexy. You say it's an abuse of privacy. So I think that's saying a lot about us individually.
I guess so. Yeah. Before this stalking moment happens, they both kind of break up with their significant others. And what I like is that she breaks up with Greg Kinnear in a movie theater, I think because she admits that she didn't vote. And he's like, "I forgive you." And then they go out
right.
to dinner, right? And they have a very amiable breakup. And it reminded me of Sleepless in Seattle, because in Sleepless in Seattle, the same thing happened. She broke up with her boyfriend over dinner, and it was very amiable. Like, I'm just not into this relationship. So it's very interesting that Meg Ryan keeps playing these characters that are just not totally into the guy she's dating and just easily leaves the relationship.
Okay, would you hate me if I told you I never saw all of Sleepless in Seattle?
Okay, you know what though?
Why are we doing this
I
show?
think I've only seen bits and pieces because I found it so sad when the kids started calling in that I was like,
oh my
I cannot
God.
watch this. I know. So I've seen
Mm.
lots of parts of it. And I
Yeah.
love Rosie O'Donnell in it, but
Oh
I
my
just
goodness.
Oh, Rosie O'Donnell is in it?
Mhm, she's Meg Ryan's like,
Rosie
best
O'Donnell
friend.
is the best friend. You guys have got to do better with your
Listen,
life.
Listen, I'm with
Oh
Lynn.
my God.
When
No.
I saw that, because I remember like it being on TV, and I was like, "Oh, maybe I should watch this." And this was years ago, way after it was released, by the way. And the kid, the kid is like sad, and I'm like, "Oh, his mother died." I was like, "I can't."
Right? Like it made me
I
so
can't.
sad.
Yes.
You're missing out on a really classic movie. There's so many good lines in that movie.
So I guess
and
we have to
classic
do
Tom
that
Hanks.
too.
Yeah.
We have to do that
Yeah.
movie. First of all, those nice breakups are definitely a thing of pure fantasy.
It's not
Yeah,
really.
that doesn't happen.
That is not.
And it was
No.
like in that specific scene, Greg Kinnear's like, "I kind of like this other person." And she's like,
And
"Oh,
she's
that's
like,
great.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good for you. Is it that one girl that I saw you on TV with? Yes, it is. Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And
And
she's
then-
like, I could tell, I knew. And you're like,
Yeah. You're like,
Right,
"Oh,
okay.
You're handling that very well.
The Parker Posey scene in the elevator is
Oh my
what
God.
is the impetus for Joe Fox breaking up with,
Yes.
his girlfriend. What was it that she started to scream? She was looking for something in her purse.
Like
She wanted a
Tic Tacs
Tic
or
Tac.
something?
That's right.
Yeah,
Tic
Tic
Tacs. All right,
Tacs.
Tic Tacs.
Right, because the elevator guy is like waxing poetic about the love of his life or something, and Tom Hanks is getting all swept away, and then she's
Yeah.
like, I can't find my Tic Tacs.
And then he's like, "That's it. That's the
Yep,
straw that broke the
exactly.
camel's
That
back."
was the
Now, I feel there's an elevator scene. I mean, I just read your novel, Lynn, so I don't know why I'm blanking, but there is something with an elevator. They don't get stuck, but they make out in the elevator.
Yeah, I
there's a
think they're
makeout
close
scene.
to naughty times in an elevator, and then
Yes.
it doesn't happen.
Yeah,
Look at me,
right,
I'm like,
that's-
I think. But you write these things a long time ago before they come out, and then you're working on other stuff, and I'm like, did I?
you're like,
Yes.
maybe.
There was an elevator. Oh, I think there's nothing sexier than making out or having quick sex in an elevator. I have
I
not done
swear,
it.
I'm with you, because I think every freaking adult book I've written now has elevator times in it. So
Oh, that's
Elevator
interesting.
time.
yeah.
Elevator time is the right time.
After that
Yeah.
momentous scene where he stalks her to her home and wipes her, apparently caresses her face while she has the flu.
Yes.
Then after that, they become friends. They start becoming friends. They
Yes, they
start
do.
hanging out. And what's funny to me is that he runs into her at Starbucks and she starts telling him about this guy, this pen pal. And he's like, I think he's married. He must be married. And I was like, why is he doing this? Why is he putting all these like nuggets of like, maybe this isn't the right guy for you?
Well, I thought he
Into
was
her
trying to find a way to have her start separating herself from
Mhm, mhm,
Yeah.
emotionally his alter ego. That way he could scoop in and
mhm.
win her over. I want to mention something. Being we talked about touching her face and her being sick, so I noticed something about handkerchiefs. Okay, handkerchiefs are mentioned throughout, almost like a hearkening to the days of old, because
Yeah.
throughout the movie there's this whole old versus new,
Yeah.
digital communication, new technology versus old analog way of
Mhm.
face to face. And one of the ways I feel like this is illustrated, albeit subtly, is this whole like handkerchief.
Yeah.
It's kind of romanticized because she starts telling this one little girl, she starts telling Tom Hanks' aunt, who's like 10 years old, which is a whole other story to unpack.
Yeah. I know.
She's like, oh, here's a handkerchief. And the girl's like, what's a handkerchief? And she's like, oh, it's like Kleenex, but you keep it forever or something
Yeah.
like that. And I'm wondering, and then at the end, he wipes her tears
Yeah.
with the handkerchief. So it's like, but is capturing a lover's tears and or snot with a handkerchief romantic?
I find handkerchiefs to be disgusting. I know that they're better for the planet, but the thought of throwing that in my washing machine is just gross.
It is.
It is gross. It's gross. My dad loves a handkerchief. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, a lot of
my
a lot
dad.
of people do.
Yeah, my dad loves
My
a
dad
handkerchief.
too.
The idea of a handkerchief, there is something romantic about it because it is classic. So that part of it I appreciate.
Yep.
I don't want you touching my face with it, but I do appreciate the romance behind it.
Do you?
I do.
It's
I
very
don't know.
sweet, but
It's sweet.
I would always be like, is that freshly washed? Like
Is it
when
clean?
he's coming at me with it, I'm like, whoa, have you used that on someone else today? Or is this clean?
Right.
Like you need to take it out of a sanitized baggie, like with the seal, so you know for sure. Oh, it's the first time you used today. Okay, we're good.
Then that's fine. That's
Mhm.
fine.
You don't
And
know.
building on that, I did touch upon the fact that Tom Hanks has a 10-year-old or 10-year-old aunt, and he's got like a 4 or 5-year-old brother. And what I thought was interesting, when Meg Ryan looks confused, he says, we're an American family.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking,
Yeah.
no, that seems more like a European family. Like that dynamic to me, I've never heard of. And that's fine. Like it's fun and entertaining. And I'm sure it's possible. But was that supposed to be like a commentary on life in the late 90s was, we just, I don't know. Like it was kind of strange.
I think it
was
was
strange.
funny.
To refer
It
to it
charmed
as-
her. You could
Yeah.
tell she
Yeah.
was like, oh.
Yeah.
You
I know. I'd
know.
be charmed by that. I'd be
I
like,
feel like it was more a commentary on like the ultra wealthy. That's
Yeah.
an American
Ah.
rich
True.
family.
Now
Yeah.
that could be. We're building up to this moment where they decide to, all right, let's meet. Okay. I think it was Meg Ryan. Let's meet. Tom Hanks is like, yeah, let's do it. Cause he's like, I'm ready to lay it on her. I feel like she likes me a bit more. She won't be too disappointed when she knows it's me. So, she's standing in the park in New York City and she's waiting for him. And they're playing over this scene somewhere over the rainbow.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is such an electrifying scene. Why are you playing somewhere over the rainbow? Like, I feel like it didn't fit the vibe. Okay. I'm like, ignore it, Liz, ignore it. Okay. So then we see Tom Hanks and she's like, oh, like Joe is here. Isn't that a coincidence? And then as he walks towards her, I got like, what's it called?
Oh, yeah, the chills, like goosebumps.
Yeah. I was like, oh my God, this is so electrifying. And he comes and she's like, oh, I had hoped it was you.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, it's me. And he wipes her tears with the handkerchief,
Don't cry, shop girl.
And he's got his dog with him, Brinkley. And they have a kiss that I thought was so lacking in heat, and it seemed awkward. And the most heat was exhibited by the dog Brinkley, who dry humped the two of them at the end.
That is true. The dog got his own happy ending. So
I
good for
missed
him.
that. I never noticed the dog dry humping them.
They're pulling away. The camera is doing like a pull away. And all of a sudden he jumps. Obviously, I don't think that was planned. He jumps and he like gets, Tom Hanks in like a grope. And I'm just like, it was such a beautiful buildup. The song, the kiss, the dog humping, it left me wanting more.
I will say, when I watched this again and I saw that kiss, I was like, I remember this kiss from the first time that I watched this movie, because even the first time that I watched this, something is off about this kiss. Yeah. It was like his neck was in a funny position. Like his neck was in a funny position. Something about it. I think when they kissed like one and then they kissed continuously. The second kiss was like a little uncomfortable, but I remember when I rewatched it, I was like, I remember feeling this the very first time that I saw this, that this kiss is a little awkward.
I remember always thinking the kiss was just sort of boring, like like two old people who've been together for 100 years kissing. But then again, I don't know if anybody wants to see Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks tear it up either. Like
that's fair.
Like they're both kind of like American institutions in and of themselves. But I always thought, and I think it's because my husband ruined it one of the times I watched it. He I don't think he's ever seen the whole thing, but he watched a good chunk of it with me. And then at the ending, he was like, that's the ending. It's like she finds out he's been lying the whole time. And she just doesn't even say like a word of, like, and ever since he said that, now I love that movie. Like it's, like I said, I've watched it 100 times. I love it. But the ending, I'm always like, it does seem like there would be a second of, you've been lying to me for a really long time. Like she could forgive him, but it does seem weird that she would be like, oh, I was hoping it was you when you were lying. Yay.
I wrote that down because the first time I was like, oh, this is really sweet. As an adult, I was like, I would have been furious.
Yeah.
I would have been, you told me that my guy that I like could have been married. That was you talking about yourself.
Yeah.
I would have been furious with him.
One thing I wanted to ask in kind of wrapping this all up is, Lynn, and in the acknowledgements, you mentioned kind of a rom-comedy start to your relationship with your husband. There's kind of a mention, and it sounds very Olivia and Colin.
Oh, I met him when I think I was 18 or almost, I think I was 19, and we worked together. And he was the front desk like supervisor. He was like a year older than me at a hotel, and I got hired as a front desk clerk. And he just, when we would work together, he would, like mess with my hair and just be a total pain in the rear. And of course I fell madly in love with him because he was just an irritant every time I worked, but he was the most fun to work with. Like we, for a long time, were just coworkers, and he was fun. But then it was funny years later. Like, I mean, this was 20 years after we got together. We were at one of his work functions and somebody asked how we met. And I was about to answer, and he's like, she was the worst employee I've ever had. And I was like, what? This is what you tell people? And that is totally the perfect, like, on brand for how we are. Like, he's Mr. Like, he's in HR and he follows all the rules, and I'm kind of a slack ass. And, it's just, we totally did kind of have a rom-com-y start. So
thank you so much for joining us, Lynn.
Thank you. This has been a blast. I've had a great time.
Ooh. I'm glad to
We've
hear
had
it.
lots of fun. Yeah.
And in the words of Mr. Wrong Numbers heroine Olivia Marshall, quoting You've Got Mail's Kathleen Kelly, all this nothing has meant more to me than so many somethings.